Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ralph World. I'm Mac, and with me, as always, is
Uncle Brett.
And today, Uncle Britt is going to be taking the lead on today's topic. We are talking about something that he actually brought to my attention, something that I had never heard of before, but I actually find the concept of it very interesting. It is something called media literacy.
So, a little backstory. It actually kind of started off of Avatar The Last Airbender that we previously watched. And it's not about the show specifically. It was a thought that started there, and then I noticed something else within social media called media literacy, and how creators I follow started talking about this notion of, in modern media, whether that be films and TV like we're going to talk about today, or even to a degree marketing, just your understanding of the media you're consuming and how you're viewing it as what's actually being shown to you versus what you should be taking away from it, like a lesson or a theme, or the more abstract things than what you're visually seeing in front of you. And for me, I fully believe media literacy is in a bit of a decline. Like, I'm not sitting here saying people are stupid, but just from our end and the production end of it, I think media literacy has gone down. And I've said this to him before, but the phrase I go back to is people need to be told things, not shown things now. Mm-hmm. Whereas you go back to the 90s or earlier and things are shown to you, they're not told to you. You make inferences and put things together on your own to draw out more information from the movie, the TV show, than what they're directly telling you. It adds more layers to the things that you're watching than if you just have, as many other people talk about, exposition dumps at the start of a movie, or you just have one character whose sole purpose is, I'm going to explain every question anyone has, and then die. Because that was their literal only purpose, so once you get the information, you don't need them anymore. But really, I wanted to ask you if you shared the same opinion with me on it. We've talked about it before, but I truly believe that media literacy has gone down from both viewership and production, from writing and viewing.
I was actually relieved when you brought this up because I often wondered. I'm not a big fan of a lot of modern movies. It's not that I don't like the story. It's not that I don't like what they're about. It's just that, like, the scripts seem so poorly written to me compared to movies that I had seen before. And for the longest time, since there is. If you're watching this, you probably realize there's an age difference between us. Like, I'm in my 40s, and I often wondered, am I becoming that guy? Back when I was a kid, oh, music these days sucks. Like, it's not like it was back in my time. Am I thinking that, but with movies? That, movies these days aren't any good. They were better back in my time. Like, was that just me? But as you and I watched a lot of older movies, and you started to realize that there was a different way of storytelling, and watching a lot of reaction YouTube channels like Dos Cavatos and Cinebinge, that when they started watching older movies, they even noticed that there was a difference in storytelling, so much to the point that at least one of those channels actively bags on modern movies for the exposition dump, like you just said. And I do think that there is more of a turn into just tell them, don't show them. I have theories about why that is happening since you brought this topic up. And it's not that I don't think exposition dumps have a place or that they can work. One of the most famous ones, and one of the first ones, is the opening crawl to Star Wars. But what that does is that brings you up to speed on where the movie starts. It's not telling you what's already going to be happening in the movie. I think that's the big difference between something like the Star Wars crawl versus, and I don't mean to bag on the MCU, but these are the movies that I'm thinking of right now. Whereas in the MCU, they basically tell you what's going to happen before it happens.
And a weird thing that the MCU movies do is things happen between movies. Yeah. And that is a symptom of it them trying to make it feel like a living place that's growing even outside of the movie you're watching, so that when you get to the next one, it doesn't feel like, well, the world stopped until this started.
The connected cinematic
Yes.
universe, yeah.
And so things are gonna happen outside. Like in Star Wars, they do not pick up immediately after the other. Little things have happened that just make it a bit more interesting of a place to start. And yes, the scroll in the beginning is an exposition dump. It is all exposition.
Yeah.
You do not technically need any of that to know what's happening. I hate to say it, but there are people who don't read it and still watch the Star Wars movies. But
The only time I think the crawl really matters is between A New Hope and Empire, because it basically fills in the gaps of how much time has passed,
Yeah.
why they're not on Yavin anymore, why Vader is actively looking for Luke. Like, you hit those three marks, and then the movie just starts from there.
And the main reason with that is just because the original movie was made to be a one-off. So,
Yeah.
like, when they made the sequels, okay, we
have to do
didn't
this.
end
Yeah.
this.
Like, I feel like they did it in the first one just to give some history of what was
Yeah.
happening, and then when they started making the sequels, they were like, we have to do this all the time now. Like, this is a staple of the franchise.
And this isn't something that's just come out of nowhere of people thinking, because there's a YouTuber, his Critical Drinker, a while back he did a comparison of the Ghostbuster 2016 versus the original Ghostbusters. He just compared one scene of each, and I don't remember exactly what the scenes were.
I do.
What was it, like the elevator scene in the original? And then
It was the first powering up of the proton packs. Because I don't agree with a lot of what the drinker says, but I remember watching this video and I remember seeing that scene, and the way that they played it in the elevator with just the flick of a switch, the sound of the pack, the way that the other two, like the way that Venkman and Egon got out of the way of like any blast that would happen, versus just the like ad-lib slapstick of the 2016 version. And keep in mind, this is not us bagging on that movie because it was an all-female cast. We particularly don't care about that aspect
I
of
mean,
it.
if we're being honest, there's the gender to the Ghostbusters straight up doesn't matter.
No.
The age doesn't even matter to a degree. I mean,
That
they
was
could be
just-
teens.
That was just a bad movie.
Yeah, it was.
And this side-by-side comparison was a prime example of why. Because they told you more in a short amount of time with a more amusing scene than something that lasted like 5 minutes and just meandered and went nowhere.
And it wasn't just the staging and how it was shot, it was the dialogue that was said. In the original Ghostbusters, the dialogue that's said serves multi-purpose.
Yeah.
It's explaining their dynamic between each other because they're kind of, you realize they're comfortable, they're kind of digging back and forth, but they're also professional enough that they realize we need to talk and figure out what we're doing here so we're on the same page. And you do all of that in just really a couple lines exchange.
Yeah.
But you get all of that from that, and you're not even missing a beat. You may not like it consciously sit there and think, oh, these guys are best friends and they've been doing this for years. But the feeling you get is, oh, these guys are comfortable.
Yeah.
So subconsciously you make those connections of these guys have been doing it for a while. They've been friends, or maybe they're not friends, but they're very comfortable coworkers.
Like that elevator scene, one of the lines, "We've never had a successful test of this equipment. I blame myself." So do I.
Exactly. Like they're digging at each
Yeah.
other, but it's still a matter of fact of like, this isn't tested. We don't know if this is going to work.
Yeah.
And the other one acknowledges it. It's kind of a dig, but you realize that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Whereas, like you said, the other one, it's just this scene of slapstick and the one flying around and hitting a bunch of stuff and then ad-libbing a bunch of lines. And
That's not really that funny either.
no.
Like, it really wasn't. That scene specifically we're talking about.
For a while in movies, I was all for the sort of actors ad-libbing lines. Because you might say something that's genuinely funnier than what's written, or more, or it just conveys the message better than what you're trying to say. But
Sometimes
you
it just...
also need a script. You need a structure. You need to, if they can't come up with anything, you still have that script in your hand that's going to block the scene, or shoot the scene, I should say.
Like there are some famously ad-libbed lines. But for me, a good ad-libbed line, while it may come off the cuff, is still in the moment of that story. Like
Yes.
the one that's really popping out to me right now is in The Godfather, leave the gun, take the cannoli. Okay? Like
That was ad lib.
that was
I did not
ad-libbed.
know that.
Yeah. And like have you seen The Godfather? Do you understand the connection of that
I
line?
watched them when I was very young.
Okay.
So I'll be dead honest with you. I remember scenes and bits, but I do not remember the coherent story.
I'm the same way. I haven't watched The Godfather in probably a decade or more at this point. But if I remember the scene correctly, earlier in that scene, the gentleman that said that line, his wife had told him pick up some cannolis while you're out. So when he got to that scene, the actor just ad-libbed that out, and the director, I think it was Coppola, was like, keep it. That was great. So like a good ad-libbed line stays in the context of what you're doing, what you're saying, your character, the universe you're in. Whereas like now, you get, and like let's take 2016 for example, Ghostbusters 2016, and I don't mean to keep bagging on this, but I think the problem with 2016 was you had a director that cast a bunch of people from SNL
Yeah.
that are used to being off the leash and just saying stuff off the cuff. Doesn't necessarily mean it's funny or that it makes sense in context, which in SNL you can get away with.
Yeah.
But when you're doing a multi-million, billion-dollar production, you have to have a director that can rein it in and say, this was funny, but it doesn't make sense, or this is going on too long, which is that whole, going back to that proton pack scene, meandered, went nowhere, it was directionless.
And this scene, or whoa, what he just said contradicts my whole thing of.
Contradicts?
Oh, hold on.
Okay.
Hold on.
Okay.
It may contradict my saying of people are told things, not shown things now. You could make the argument, but you weren't shown anything in that.
No.
Like once you saw it happen at first, like okay, it's out of control, they can't control it. Well, then it's just an ongoing thing. There is nothing more that you're getting out of it except I mean, I guess except laughs, but I didn't think I don't think the movie's funny.
No. Neither do I.
Chris Hemsworth felt pretty wasted, but so did most of the people in the movie.
For real, man.
Like
For
I
real,
love
seriously.
the short hair Kate McKinnon.
Man,
I love Kate McKinnon, dude.
she was the one that I had the highest expectations for, and I was like, it was kind of like she was the one at the party that got sucked up into
Yeah.
everything and just started going along with it while everybody else was going along with it. I'm like, Kate, you're better than this.
But like and kid show or just kid oriented stuff, I feel has taken a massive hit with media literacy.
100%.
Because you go back to the 80s of children's entertainment or like GI Joes, that is literally war figures. Like I mean, that makes it sound a little more intense than it is, but like the concept of it was a bunch of people doing war. Like that was the toys and movies and the shows you were watching. And then now they like shy away from war. Now you can't have conflict. Everything has to be peaceful and colorful and nice.
What's interesting is right now in the action figure industry, Warner Brothers and Marvel have this caveat that even if the character, not Marvel so much as DC does, but Marvel has it to a point as well. Like they had to break it for things like Deadpool. As a matter of fact, Marvel may have just completely dropped it, but DC had this caveat of, we don't care if the character had guns in the comic. You cannot make the action figure have guns. That's kind of hypocritical.
But you can have swords and all
Yeah.
that, but not a gun.
Right.
Because
Even if the character in the comic had one.
what's the point?
Exactly.
So you're just going to get a non-comic book accurate action figure, and then people are going to make guns anyway.
Yeah.
Like people are going to 3D print guns
Yeah.
for their action figures.
They don't
That's
even-
a reality of the world now.
They don't even have to. There are companies that are like making weapons packs, like,
Oh.
but not calling it like this is Blue Beetle's gun, or like this is, you know, Mr. Freeze's freeze ray. Like,
This is Mr. Beetle blue variant gun.
so they're just making weapons packs and getting it out there in people's hands. So all they did was create a secondary market.
Because the prohibition was such a good sign of
Yeah.
blocking something people want.
But going back to like even like what you said with children's movies, like one of my favorite experiences over the past couple of years was introducing you to things like Legend.
Yeah.
Okay, Legend, and did we watch The Neverending Story yet?
We have not, but I am quite aware of the
Okay.
Never-Ending Story. But Legend, for those of you that don't know, Tom Cruise was in a movie when he still had his tooth dead center of his mouth. You won't be able to unsee it. You're welcome. But in the movie, Tim Curry plays this demon.
He was the devil. He wasn't a demon. He was the devil.
No. He wasn't the devil. I remember
that's
you saying
right,
that.
Father,
He was
yeah.
just a demon.
Yeah.
Fodder in any other context. But this one just lowly demon, terrifying, my man. Like, this dude was so sincere, and the way he was shot, it could have been a horror movie. The makeup and costuming was so real
When he put her in the black dress.
oh my god, like
Yeah.
there's a whole dancing scene that happens, and I kid you not, I actually had to ask him when it was happening what was happening, because I was a little lost. It was a little weird. She was just dancing with a dress. Like, I understand there's symbolism to the scene and everything, but when I was in the thick of it, man, I was like, she's dancing with a dress, and this dude's about to show up and kill her. Let's see what happens. But, like, that movie touches on loss of innocence, war, actually, racism. Like, and not to go through every single lesson I learned from that movie, but like it just tackled such deep, challenging issues, and not all of them were addressed with a clean answer. It wasn't like, oh yeah, if you're bad, you deserve to die, or if you're good, you're virtuous. It's like, hey man, this good person did this really bad thing, and then, you know, he spent the rest of his life trying to redeem that, so he's kind of all right now.
Or the first time I showed you the beginning of the old Thundercats cartoon,
Yeah.
when Mumra transformed.
Yeah, pretty intense animation on that one, man.
But that, like, I feel like that leads into this whole theory, or not this theory, but like this habit, this modern way of storytelling where like writers kind of coddle the audience. It's happening horribly with children's entertainment. That like PG doesn't really mean anything anymore. No. But when you get into like even adult movies now, going back to like Cinebinge and Dos Cavatos, it happens more with Cinebinge, I feel, than Dos Cavatos. But like watching their earlier videos, their earlier reactions to movies, like especially like in the first year when they were watching older movies, there was this almost constant of, what was that? What's happening? What's going on? Because I don't think they were used to an older style of storytelling where like, look, just because you don't know what's happening now, you'll be told, or it's not really going to matter. You know what I mean? Like, you'll be told the important stuff. Just sit back and enjoy this and enjoy the ride. Whereas they were used to, like what we said with the MCU movies, they're used to this whole, we're going to tell you what's going to happen before it happens. Like I said, I have my theories of why this happened. What do you think was the start of all of this, or why do you think this goes on, since this is your topic?
I think it was a two-folded thing. I truly believe it may have started from a production standpoint of, we want to make more content to get it out faster, so it was kind of a pressure thing of like deadlines, the writing needs to be done here, this needs to be done here. And this isn't exactly literacy, but it's the same kind of thing that happens with a lot of CGI, with why CGI today looks so bad a lot of times, but then you
Versus,
go
like,
back
stuff.
20 years ago and it's like, this thing, like Pirates of the Caribbean. The CG in that movie, I know I'm a fan if you can't tell, but the CG in that movie holds up really well.
Or the first Jurassic Park.
Yes, and that's the one I usually go to. But it's these deadlines and pressures and studio heads and just suits getting involved with the process. And then this was actually a point you brought up before, but like 25 writers writing the same thing. You're just, it's going to grind gears. Nothing's going to move forward until you have the most generic and open script that's like, well, no one can possibly infer anything except exactly what I've written. And it doesn't work to tell a good story that way. And then on the flip side of it, they may be, for lack of a better way to describe it, they may be dumbing down the script, but then on the viewer end of it, when you do have these movies that have these like unique way of showing things, well, those movies don't get picked up as much. You're not watching them as much. So the industry is going to produce what people are flocking to. And while I am a product of the MCU, I literally grew up on those movies.
Right.
They are a product of that. We flock to them. We have made that a billion, maybe $1 trillion industry at this point. And the scripts to those movies aren't all that deep most of the time, if all of the time. Not to say I hate these movies. I grew up on them. I am invested into so many of them all the way through Infinity War and Endgame. But I'm not going to sit here and say they're some of the best written or best shot films. They fall under the category of fun to me. And that's not a bad category, but I wouldn't exactly call the MCU movies versus Jurassic Park or Casablanca to be in the same sort of category. Those movies are also fun, but what you're getting out of them is what you put into them. If you want to look in the background and dissect lines, there's stuff for you to find. But if you don't, it's still a very good love story, and that's what you can walk away with. It's just a two-pronged assault on the same media that I feel like has just really brought it down and almost brought it to a standstill of like, well, you don't want to watch the more interesting, complex things. Well, I don't want to make the more interesting, complex things. No one's happy with what's being made now.
I think, as far as the MCU goes, and I'm not saying popularity of the movie. I'm talking about solid script, intriguing story, depth of character. I don't think the MCU ever got higher than the three original origins: Iron Man, Thor, and Cap. Like those first three movies where they were like really focusing on developing these characters before it became the MCU, before it blew up. Like you had Stark dealing with like his own personal demons of, I created this, all of these weapons. Like he even was fighting his own weapons at one point, I think. Okay.
I mean, the bomb that did the whole chest thing is his own bomb. Alcoholism.
Thor being brought down a peg, having to live among the people, like earning the right to pick up Mjolnir. I still say that like in the MCU, when he tries to lift Mjolnir out of the crater and he can't do it, and he realizes what Odin has done to him, that's one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the early days of the MCU. When he just crumbles and he lets S.H.I.E.L.D. take him prisoner. Let's make no bones about that. He let them take him because he was crushed. And then, like, what else?
The character is allowed to be weak.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And, like, what else? What do you have to say about Captain America? Like, what do you have to say about Captain America? You know what I mean?
I know you're a little iffy on the third one, but I think the Captain America trilogy is maybe outside of the Avengers movies, but for different reasons. The Captain America trilogy is really where the MCU shined brightest to me.
It is. It is.
Like, just from production, story, characters, it all felt so natural and good, and it was fun.
Winter Soldier, even though I knew the Winter Soldier storyline because I'd read the comic and, like, I remembered when... Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie.
Yeah, watch yourselves.
But when I read the Winter Soldier story arc in the comic and it was revealed that it was Bucky, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up because nobody had ever even contemplated bringing Bucky back. This was before like the days of leaks and like, you know, things like that, that like the idea that they were doing this hadn't even, we were just under the impression that this was the Russian version of Cap or something like that. You know what I mean? And you had Red Skull there as well. So like, even as a reader, all of your attention was going to Red Skull. Winter Soldier was just this hired assassin, but then like the reveal of Bucky was incredible. So I knew it was going to be Bucky. So like that didn't take me by surprise. But what got me was the fight on the helicarrier. I'm not leaving you. I am not ashamed to admit, like I started to get that tingle in my eyes. I was like, oh man, Steve. This guy's trying to kill you, and you're just like, I'm not leaving you.
Yeah, dude. Cap was at the end of Endgame and the whole Infinity Saga. Cap was my favorite.
And they did in that movie, in Winter Soldier, they also, with everything else they were cramming together, Hydra took over S.H.I.E.L.D. Black Widow and Cap established like their friendship because they're both like basically fighting for S.H.I.E.L.D. Cap's struggle with, am I with S.H.I.E.L.D. or am I Captain America? Bucky. And then they still managed to make you believe that him and Falcon became best friends meeting in the same movie. That was that movie is probably the MCU at its best, quite honestly. Like, and the only thing I have with the third movie about Civil War is I wish they would have just given Evans a trilogy and Civil War would have been its own thing. Like, that's my big issue with Civil War being the third Captain America movie. I would have rather just seen like a third Solo, and then like Civil War would have just been its own movie. You know what I mean?
And, you know, given our topic of discussion for this episode, I wouldn't think it's too far to say that by the time they got to that third movie, there could have been a notion around of like, we have the Avengers, we've gotten Avengers 2 out, because I think 3 came out after 2, Age of Ultron, right?
Yes, Avengers 3 came out after.
No. Sorry, Captain America 3 came out after.
Oh yeah, because
Age
it was
of Ultron.
It was the Wachovia Accords.
Yeah, okay, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So, by that
I'm sorry,
point...
I lost what you were talking about.
Yes, thank you. Avengers 3 came out.
I'm sorry. Continue.
But I think there could have been the fear of, well, if we don't bring in the other Avengers, or we don't bring in more of the other heroes, like the established heroes, not just because Falcon was solely established in that one movie.
Yes.
That it could have been a thing of like, well, if we don't have more people in here, people aren't going to care, people aren't going to watch, people aren't going to be as intrigued. They're going to be asking the question, where are the other Avengers?
Yeah.
And kind of blinding themselves to the fact of, this isn't an Avengers movie.
Yeah.
That's a different thing. And it's okay to separate them.
Because what Winter Soldier did really well, because we'd already had the Avengers, we'd had the first Avengers movie after that, what Winter Soldier did really well was it was believable that the other Avengers wouldn't be involved in this, because it was such a contained story. He didn't have time to assemble them. They didn't have time to find out. By the time they would have found out anything was going on, him and Widow were basically taking care of business. And oh, that elevator scene. I love that elevator scene. So like, when you look at that trilogy, when you look at that movie, when you look at the first Thor, when you look at the first Iron Man, and then you look at what it's become, like, that's where I've kind of like just lost interest in the MCU because of what it used to be. You've even made this mention on old Marvel movies when we were watching the Blade trilogy, and we watched Blade 3, the one with Ryan Reynolds in it, and you had commented on how different it was to see the guy making quips actually be looked at as like the annoyance in universe rather than this is just how everybody talks.
Yeah. Like it's such an odd contrast to see as someone who grew up on them again. Because you go back and you watch it, and Ryan Reynolds plays the same kind of Ryan Reynolds Deadpool-esque character.
I was going to say that his character in that is almost the Deadpool prototype.
And so you have that prototype, but everyone views him as like, dude, shut up, do your job. You're so annoying right now.
And not just Blade, like the rest of the Night Watchers, because him and Whistler's daughter, I can't remember what her first name was, but him and Whistler's daughter, Blade and Whistler's daughter, both looked at King and was like, what are you doing?
Yeah. And it's not to say he was a terrible character.
No.
He played the part he needed to play.
Yeah.
But he was the annoying character. He was the character where everyone was being serious and having a discussion that would make the unnecessary joke. And unlike in Iron Man or the MCU, everyone doesn't make quips. Like, oh my God, I am so sick of that in the MCU. I liked it when it was Tony, because then Captain America was straight-faced, and then Thor didn't quip because he was like Shakespearean.
Yeah.
And look, I'm okay that they dropped the Shakespeare stuff because that would have gotten old. But you could have kept the character type and had diversity between them.
Because it was like, I feel like even though the script may have done it sometimes, I feel like Chris Evans, never lost sight of the fact that Cap, Steve, was a man out of time. You know what I mean? Like, even if the script didn't draw direct attention to it, just the way that Evans played the role, the way that he said his lines, the way he even enunciated some things, you always got that impression of, this is not a guy from this time period. So much to the point that, like, if you didn't know he was Captain America, if you didn't know the story, and you met this guy on the street and you were talking to him, at some point you would think to yourself, what's with this guy?
Yeah, you'd be like, he reminds me of my grandfather.
Something like that, yeah.
Like, it would just, you would have that vibe of like, wow, you like things old, like the old way. And it just leads to so many more interesting things. And even from a viewpoint of us, like reviewing or quote unquote reviewing movies and everything, when we review a lot of the new stuff, sometimes it's hard to even delve deeper into it because it's
There's no meat to it.
We can really only talk about exactly what they showed us, and then I get the meat of what we talk about is our opinion of it, not so much us deducing what it could be.
Like, to me, some of the most annoying reaction channels, and I don't even know if they're reaction channels, or like these channels that like analyze movies, overanalyze movies, is that whenever they take a movie, like especially modern ones, and they say, well, the secret meaning of this was, and I'm like, no, that was not the secret meaning. Like, what you saw is what you get. Stop trying to make these deeper than what they are, because I guarantee you, you're thinking more about it right now than the writers were. Whereas, like, before, I feel like, and it there are some examples of it happening now, and we'll talk about those, but like, I feel like before there was also, because there were less people in the writer's room, and you had maybe like 1-2 writers working out the script, then you had a script doctor come in and create the screenplay, but it was still basically the same idea. I feel like when it was a more compact team, there was this sense of pride in like, I want to write this. And I'm not saying that like writers now are out there to like just produce bad movies. Like, nobody says, I'm going to write a bad movie.
Yeah, nobody sat down and wanted to write Mobius.
But Morbius, whatever.
Exactly.
But I feel like that when there's so many people in the writer's room, plus you have studio heads in the writer's room, at some point I have to believe that some sort of creative fatigue sets in, and the writer just says, screw it, what do they want? I'll just write that. You know what I mean? It kind of goes back to what we said the problem was with the DCEU, that the problem was Warner Brothers execs, not necessarily Snyder, although he didn't help, but like, the problem was that the execs were trying to steer the direction that scripts and stories and movies were going. That like, we singled out the DCEU specifically for that episode, but I feel like that's pretty endemic of the entire industry right now, with a few exceptions.
Even TV shows, especially TV shows.
100%, yeah.
They get they get like one season to prove themselves if they can get an audience, and then maybe 2, 3, 4 seasons later where they were just running it themselves, and now that the studio sees that, okay, we're making money off of this consistently, and then like around season 3, 4 of a lot of shows, a lot of weird just changes start happening. And it's because these studio execs come in and they're like, okay, how can we make more money off of this? Maybe we should bring in new characters. Maybe we should make spin-offs. So now honestly, I'm thinking of Supernatural at the moment, but there's episodes that become solely based on setting up a spin-off show that never happens. So now you just have this one episode in the middle of a show that connects to nothing because it didn't go anywhere.
Oh, don't get me wrong. You had that in the 80s and the 90s, too. It wasn't nearly as prevalent as it is now, but there are, and of course, none of them are coming into my head right now, but I know, like, there were episodes of an old show called Magnum P.I., where there was an episode that was supposed to set up a spin-off episode. There was an episode of, I think it was the original NCIS, where like the entire regular team was given a day off and they focused on a whole other team that was supposed to lead into a spin-off. So that has always happened, and that just, especially if it's in the middle of a story arc, that just throws like a wrench in the works. But
if anyone's watched anime, you understand exactly what this is. It's filler.
Yeah. The few that I think are that have broken out of this trend, and one that I think highlights all of these problems but gets away with it. Let's talk about that first. Nothing but quips, nothing but exposition dump. But Deadpool can pull it off because it's Deadpool. Like, he is specifically set up for that movie. You know what I mean? And that's his character. Like, and he gets away with the exposition dumps because he talks to us. It's not something that happens.
Like, the exposition you get from him is entertaining because it's coming from him.
Talking to you, breaking the fourth wall.
So you don't even actually know all the time if what he's even saying to you is true.
Yeah.
So that in and of itself makes it more compelling, because he could look at the camera and be like, weird being away from Fox now, isn't it? And if you don't know anything about behind the scenes, you're just like, huh?
Well, yeah, because it's like in that new, it's in the new trailer when he says, I'm no stranger. I can't even do it straight. I'm no stranger to pegging. And then he looks at the camera, but Disney is.
I know. Like, Deadpool really is an irregularity because
100%.
There's no reason that movie, the franchise, should be as popular as it is outside of the fact that if we didn't have the MCU, I don't think that movie would have hit a chord with people the way it does.
And not to like fanboy on him during this episode, but I really think if you didn't have Ryan Reynolds as the motivating force behind this, I think it would have just come off. It would have come off so like fake. You know what I mean?
It would have felt like a ripoff of either Tony Stark or any other character that did quips because they had been known for it at that point. But the way he does it is unlike everyone else. And I have to believe the director works well enough with Reynolds to be able to be like, okay, we may do 18 takes of this, but realistically, you understand there's only like 2 or 3 good ones in here.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to pick from.
Yeah.
So it's a give and take.
And it's like this fast wit that comes off of that just rolls off the top of Deadpool's head, like it seems to come so naturally to Reynolds, which is why like I drew the parallel, or like we both even mentioned it, that like Hannibal King in Blade 3 kind of was the prototype to Deadpool, because it wasn't nearly as gratuitous in Blade 3 as it was, but it was still that just firing things off, coming up with things on the fly. Like, even if it was scripted, he made it seem like he was just coming up with this stuff as it happened. You want to talk about ad-libs that made it into the movie? In Blade 3, when Hannibal King, after the base was raided and Hannibal was in the bed and he had the IV in him, he had just had his butt kicked, okay? And he's talking to Blade, and he cracks a joke at Blade, and Blade just turns and walks away. And Hannibal says, "He doesn't like me, does he?" You remember that line? Ryan thought the camera was off, and he was talking about Snipes.
It worked.
He was talking about Wesley Snipes. He looked off to somebody actually off camera, like one of the crew, and said, "He doesn't like me, does he?" Not realizing the camera was still on him and rolling.
That's cool. That is cool. See, and like, look, that wasn't him planning that line. Sometimes accidents happen. Like, we're not saying there's one right way to make a movie or anything.
Right.
But my God, we're seeing a lot of wrong ways.
But once again, that ad lib, if you even want to call it an ad lib, that's more of like a happy accident. It fit the characters, it fit the moment, it fit the universe that they had created for that movie. Now, some of the ones that I think are bucking this trend of tell, don't show, of nothing but quips and everything we've been talking about, like one that we just finished and we actually were just talking about before this is the John Wick series.
Yeah.
Not everything is laid out there for you. Like, but you can definitely infer certain, especially with this whole world they've created, because they have not explained everything. They never really explain the gold coins. You know, and like at one point they mention, like, you know, it's a symbol of services rendered and stuff. But it's like, why does one coin get you anything you need?
And what do you get when you get the coin back?
Yeah.
What does it do?
Yeah.
Like, but the one thing that I love about the John Wick series specifically is the fact that the only way that world works is if most of the world's population is assassins.
Yeah.
Especially given, I think, how the second one ends when he's running through the city and so many different people.
Such a great ending. Yeah.
And you're like, it's making you think every person they're showing is an assassin because everyone's checking a phone, everyone's moving. And granted, they might not be, but the way the rest of the movies play out, they probably are.
In John's head, all those phones going off are assassins, whether they are or
not.
But
so
in I'm sorry, go ahead.
So in this world where everyone has to be, or majority of the people have to be an assassin for any of this to work, that's not something that's addressed. That's not something anyone points out of, like, there's a lot of people out to just kill people, isn't there? It's just, for this movie to work, this is the world it has to be. Do not think about it too much, because if most of the world is assassins, who's hiring them?
Or even like how far the reach of the high table goes. When he goes to Rome and the manager of the Continental there just blatantly asks him, "Are you here to kill the Pope?" Like, leaving the impression that they could if they wanted to.
Yeah. And and it's just that question.
Yeah.
You don't get more context on it, but so much information gets delivered. And this isn't us trying to fanboy about John Wick, although we love it. It's just a very well-written story and a very well-shot story. And it's not even just franchises. It's not just action movies with guys. The movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, I think, he hasn't seen it yet, but I think is one of the best movies that have come out in years. I think it is so well written. The issues between the mom and daughter, which is the main conflict of the movie, I guess spoiler if you haven't seen it, but is the main conflict of the movie. And it doesn't get to this point of like whiny repetition of, oh, these two have issues, so they're going to keep fighting. It gets to a point of them sitting down and being like, look, this isn't working. What we're doing isn't doing anything. What's the issue? And then they talk. It doesn't go smoothly. There's still more movie going on. But it's so well written and the characterization is so good. And the main characters are not white straight men. And I don't know if that sounds weird to say, but I enjoy watching stories that take place in other cultures or other ways of life than just the way that we have known or people like us. And this movie does that. I've never operated a laundromat with my like Asian husband who was about to leave me with a gay daughter. Like, that is an experience I have and will probably never have. But the movie, even
well played. Okay.
But even given that context that I'll never live, the heart of the story between a parent and a child can resonate to anyone because you are a parent and or a child.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just such a heartwarming and at times heartbreaking movie. And it's short. It is not a long movie. And that's crazy to say, but there are so many movies that come out so long. Avatar 2 is like 8 hours.
Oh, man.
It's insanity sometimes. But
Yeah.
every shot, every line of that movie, I get the impression was so intentional that you don't want to miss anything. Whereas if I put in Transformers, dude, I could walk to the bathroom, pee, come back, grab a drink, and what did I miss? Mark Wahlberg's 18 minutes of ad-libs. Like, it...
Oh, man. Well, and, like, I'm sitting here and I'm looking across the room and I'm looking at my Rokor right there, my Black Dragon from the Dungeons and Dragons set. And, like, one of the more modern movies that's popping into my head right now is Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves.
Which I have not seen.
And people, like, I've seen people online refer to that as refreshing. And I'm like, how is that refreshing? Because it basically took the MCU template. Like, it was basically like Guardians of the Dungeon. Okay? Like, I could not get into that movie, and I have been playing D&D since the 70s. Like, I could play Dungeons and Dragons before I could spell. Like, my brother had to fill out the character sheets for me. What are you laughing about?
Just pure dedication to the craft.
Seriously, man. But, like, that was another one where I was like, this is not anything new. This is not anything groundbreaking. And not that it has to be groundbreaking, but it's basically like I'm watching, like, an MCU movie again, where it's just quips, CGI, some action. There was like one or two like really solid lines that involved the Paladin, who unfortunately wasn't in the movie all that much, but I thought he was like one of the best things about the movie. And like he had some really solid lines and like some really deep lines too, but then he was gone. It was like, okay, we had him here for like some legitimacy to the story, and now he can just walk off. And like it
Movies don't, not even just movies, media doesn't always take itself serious anymore. Like, you go back to an old action movie with Arnold, let's say, Schwarzenegger.
Mm-hmm.
The script is not great, more than likely. Like, we're not saying old movies are grand in every aspect.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of action movies have some of the worst scripts because the script wasn't important. That's not why you were watching it. So they played to their strengths.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, you had these action movies that committed to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They were corny. They were cheesy. And so much to a point, I would say it's the exact same concept as Fast and Furious. They are corny movies. They do some cheesy action stunts just because at the end of the day, this would look really cool if we did that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being cheesy or corny, but you have to commit to it. Like the original Fantastic Four movies, I guess original to me, I don't know if there's older ones, but the two that came out in like the early 2000s, I think they came out then, with Chris Evans. I love those movies. Not because they're good, but because they're so cheesy. They're just so fun. And I love just their team and chemistry in the movies. They're not well written. They're not groundbreaking shows or movies, but they're just really fun to me. And I do think that's okay. You don't need to have the cleanest script, the cleanest cinematography, but you have fun with it. Take pride in it if you're the one or two people creating it.
Like another action movie that I feel that broke the mold of modern storytelling, and it may be a bit of a cheat because it sort of came out before this wholesale change happened, but it was like right at the beginning. Was, you want to talk about something that shows you and doesn't tell you? There is like maybe 15 lines of dialogue in Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah. Yeah. That is
Seriously.
a very low script heavy movie.
Yeah. Where like they tell you just enough for you to understand what's happening, and then they just chase a truck for 2 hours, and you love it.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
There is nothing wrong with making a movie purely because you're like, this would be fun. Mm-hmm. Like the Johnny Knoxville, what's the franchise called?
Jackass?
Yes. They were literally just fun. Like, there's nothing going on else with those movies. That is the epitome of just a fun movie. And there's nothing wrong with that. So, even though we bagged on the MCU or the DCEU a lot, you got to understand, I love the MCU movies. I won't sit here and say none of them have flaws. I don't particularly like Thor 2 or... Well, I really don't like Thor 2, but Thor 3 was all right. Thor 4 sucked. But
4 was Love and Thunder. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, it was. Mm-hmm. Goats. Screaming goats. But the MCU movies are fun. At the end of the day, that's why they're made. They're not made to be the next Citizen Kane, the next Godfather. So it is a slight disservice to compare the MCU to these movies. But it's the best case in point because the MCU is so big. It is so easy to look at them. Not just the MCU. You could look at the Sony movies. Madam Web just came out. That was terrible. All the actresses don't even want to talk about the movie.
Well, but I think the problem with the MCU is that, like, people are looking at it as the template of how to make digestible movies with minimal effort and get them churned out. Which, when you talk about the budgets for these MCU movies, I'm like, where is this money going?
Yeah.
Because honestly, when you hear about the budget building and building and building for these movies, and it's getting to these numbers that, like, we as like normal people can't even comprehend that much money, but yet I'm looking at it and I'm going, this is a poorly written script. A lot of these scenes look like it was done on first take. The CG in Quantum Mania... Was it Quantum Mania? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the CG in Quantum Mania was awful. Like, that's no big secret. But, like, the CG in a lot of the MCU stuff is awful. Where's the money going?
Yeah.
Is it just reshoots? Is it because they have to go back and reshoot because something didn't screen test at, like, 100% or something?
I think it's CG, like the CG artists. I think the movies have moved so much to digital. Because, like, the early Iron Man movies, he had... a suit that he put on. It wasn't fully together.
It was the upper part.
Yeah, like he had like the upper
legs.
part. He had the leg portions. He didn't have the joint, so he could still move.
I think he had the torso, shoulders, maybe gloves, and like some thigh pieces, but everything else was like motion capture suit, so that they could CG the suit on him later.
And then by like Iron Man 3 or Avengers 2,
he's walking around in sweats.
Like I think he had he had the helmet. Like,
yeah.
When you push everything so much to CG, you quite literally lose the human aspect to it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't look real. And people pick up on that quite easily. So it's crazy to me that a company like Disney and in turn Marvel are putting so much money into these movies and you're not seeing it.
And like a very good example that somebody brought up, and I can't remember who it was, but it was a YouTuber. It may have been Mr. Sunday Movies. I can't remember. But they had used the first Avengers movie as an example. They used the first Avengers movie and they used Quantum Mania. That in the stinger, in the post-credits scene, Steve wakes up in that room listening to the Dodgers, you know, on the radio. They're trying to trick him into thinking that he's still in his time, because obviously you're not just going to come out and say, hey, you've been asleep for 80 years.
Everyone you know and loved is probably dead.
But he's sitting there and he's looking out the window and he's looking around and he grabs the clock and he looks at the clock and like he's holding it. Whereas in like Quantum Mania, I forget what the scene was they were talking about, but like Paul Rudd was walking through a lab and touched nothing because nothing existed. That you're losing that tactile connection to your set, which watching it, we may not realize he hasn't touched anything, but like your brain is recognizing that's not real, that's not natural.
And in the scene, it's more boring.
Yeah.
There's nothing for him to interact with. There's nothing for him to do. There's nothing for him to react to.
Yeah.
Like, there's an almost infamous story of Ian McKellen coming back for the Hobbit movies.
Oh, yeah.
and him having to just almost exclusively shoot with green screen. And he had this sort of breakdown on set one day of, this isn't why I got into acting. I don't want to act to nothing. I want,
Right.
like, there's no other actors with him. There's no sets around him. Like, even from an acting standpoint, that just doesn't even sound fun or enjoyable.
Or fulfilling, or like, yeah, because as an actor, a lot of your performance, especially for somebody like Ian McKellen who came from stage acting, a lot of the performance is what the other actor is feeding to you. You know, so yeah, this whole like assembly line mentality of churning out movies. So we had John Wick, we had Fury Road as an example. I had another example right now that I can't remember, and I feel awful about it. But it was something we were actually just talking about before we started recording, and I can't remember for the life of me. But I think another reason, because we touched on the writers, the problem with the writers and studio heads just wanting to churn things out as fast as they can. But I think another thing that has led to this, and it's on the consumer side of things, and it's something that we may not have even realized is happening, is just how we digest media, specifically social media. This TikTok era of social media that we live in, where like things are consumed in minutes. Like this episode is going to be an hour, if not a little longer. I guarantee most people that start listening to it won't finish it, because we're not used to these long formats anymore.
And I agree with that, and I've heard a lot of discourse about this. But I also like to bring up the fact that it's not like TikTok or even Vine or Facebook has shortened our attention spans per se, because you go back 200 years, what did you do? You went and sat on a bench outside, and as you're talking to someone, you're bird watching. Like, you're always constantly doing more than one thing, even if you don't realize it. But I do think the way we consume social media is definitely changing just our approach to media altogether. Because if you're constantly just taking in these 30-second, a lot of times less than that, bits of information, when it comes to a movie, you may not even know how to digest that much information if there was a lot more meat to it.
Yeah.
Like, you may watch it and only can take away the surface level of what you're told, because you may not even know how to think deeper of a movie than it is. Like, reading... that was a weird way to start that. A lot of people watch movies or TV shows or listen to music instead of reading. Not to say reading is dying or anything, but reading just is not as much of a relaxation to people as it used to be. And so you have the removal of this thing where it was mostly mental. You had to visualize what you were reading if you really wanted to be enthralled by the world. And now you have stuff that gives you the entire world point blank. And even the whole release of shows now, they release a whole season that you can sit down and watch. And it only just recently occurred to me that you do not digest a show that well when you do that.
No, this is what I was talking about was it the last episode we were talking about Avatar?
Yes.
But like why I don't think Avatar resonated with me so well was because you watched it week to week. You had time to think. You had time to digest. You had time to have that anticipation of, they left me on a cliffhanger, what's going to happen next? Whereas I binged it in like a weekend. And I do, like, I actually regret doing that. And that's why, like, even if, well, like Avatar, for example, like, the new Avatar.
The live action.
Yeah, the live action Avatar. Sorry about that. But like the live action Avatar, that like, I'm actually glad we left space between. Like, we may have watched like 3 episodes at a time, but I'm glad we left space between the episodes to build up that anticipation, to be able to digest like 3 episodes at a time, to think about what was happening, wondering where it was going to go, thinking, well, it did go this way before. Will they do this, or will they do this, this, and this? I even with the Netflix model of dropping entire shows, I don't binge watch new anymore. Now, if it's something that I've seen and I just, but like new shows, I actually prefer the Max, the HBO, the Max format of where like they'll release one per week, like a real TV show. Like that, I actually like that because in about 10 weeks, I think, we're going to have season 2 of House of the Dragon coming out on Max. And I was like, I need to watch the first season to get caught up on it. And there's enough time that I think I'm going to force myself to like just slow it down and watch one episode a week. I think I'll have to watch 2 episodes in the first week just because of the amount of time versus the amount of episodes. But because I feel like if I just binge the entire season like in a week or something, I still won't have as enjoyed it or have absorbed it as much to lead into season 2, which is going to be at that slowed down rate. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
No, I completely understand what you're saying because this has been a very, very new idea or thought I've had in my, not an idea, I'm not the originator of this, but like it occurred to me because I was watching anime the other day and I think I have I know. I took a break from my comic books. But I was watching it and it occurred to me that I have like 5 or 6 shows that I'm like live watching that are currently running right now. And so it's usually weekly episodes. And I find myself like not all week, but like all week thinking about that next episode and like digesting the one I just watched because it's like that's all the new information I have. And I sit there and think about it. And then I think about the other shows like the Avatar on Netflix. I could have just sat down and watched that whole entire season, but we split it up, I think, into 2 or 3 sections. And I just feel like
you absorbed more.
I did.
Yeah.
And even, like, I watched One Piece, very long show, not getting into it, but I watched it with my friend who was watching it for the first time. And as we were watching some of the later episodes that I had binged watched because it's so long, that's just kind of what you do.
Yeah.
I realized there's stuff that like I straight up did not remember. Not just like, oh, I forgot someone's name, like you and Jet. Like I just forgot some plots. And then she brought them up to me and was asking questions about it. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then I go back and I look at it and I'm like, no, I remember this, but I definitely didn't digest any part of this.
And that's why like another show that I forced myself to slow down on because Netflix releases everything all at once. Blue Eye Samurai.
Yeah.
I watched maybe 2 episodes at a time and then like maybe not a whole week because like I really wanted to get back to it, but like I would wait a few days, make myself wait a few days, think about what had happened because like that show you definitely wanted to absorb. But I don't know, like I feel like it was a combination. I don't know what came first. If it was the fast, quippy, cheap version of writing, and that sounds really insulting to the screenwriters considering, you know, we just said it's not their fault, or the shortened attention span of the viewers. I don't know if, like, is it a chicken and the egg scenario, like which came first? But I don't know, like I feel like they are definitely tied together, whether it was a studio reaction to the way we absorb media or if it's just our absorption of media is a reaction to the way it's being presented to us now. I don't know which came first, but I am glad to see that like it really, really makes me happy that more people are starting to realize this is an issue. We've kind of been robbed of some really good stories and maybe things will start to turn back into, because using Blue Eye Samurai, for example, that was another prime example of show but don't tell. She was the main character through the whole thing. How many lines did she actually have?
She was a very just soft-spoken person.
Yeah, and it wasn't like there was always somebody there to speak for her. Like,
Like, she did. It wasn't that she never talked. It's that when she spoke,
Yeah.
she spoke directly.
Yeah.
It was to the point.
Yeah.
And then you moved on.
Yeah.
There wasn't any banter. There wasn't any in between conversation.
Yeah.
It was, I'm here to find this person. Do you know where this person is? No. Okay. And then they moved on.
Yeah.
And it's refreshing. Genuinely. Like, pushing everything else aside, from a viewing standpoint, it is so refreshing to just have stories presented in different ways.
Yes.
Have a different main character who's blind, who's deaf, who doesn't like to talk, who can't talk, who likes to sing all the time. Like, just changing these things about characters can provide so many different scenarios.
Yeah.
But it's almost like movies and shows are scared to do that because, well, this scenario really worked and people really paid for this. They might not like this one.
And I feel like I've felt this along with, like, once again, not to bag on the MCU, but because it's the example we keep using, I feel like ever since Doctor Strange, all of those lead characters are interchangeable.
Yeah. Doctor Strange was just Iron Man.
Yeah, it was Iron Man with magic.
Yeah.
Like, even if you went like plot point by plot point.
Yeah. They're almost the same character.
Yeah.
And which is why Doctor Strange kind of changes so much after his movie. The only thing in the MCU that stands out to me as we're sitting here is the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Which was always its own kind of thing.
They showed up for Infinity War and Endgame and then immediately went back to their own thing.
But didn't it feel weird to have them in, like, did you feel that way? That it was like...
I didn't feel that it was weird. I felt that they should have had some sort of interaction before that.
Well, I think that was the plan before. I honestly, I can't remember what articles I had read or things, but, like, I honestly think that was the plan before Disney pushed Gunn out after the second one, and, like, pretty much the entire cast was like, we're not doing anything without it.
Oh, God, yeah. I forgot about that.
Because there was that huge gap between 2 and 3 that, like, I think there was a plan to bring them into the MCU, bring in Adam Warlock much sooner, make him have a more prevalent role in what was going on. That, like, that was, like, the first... I don't want to say it was a misstep because I understand why they did it. It was kind of ridiculous, but, like...
Missed opportunity.
Yeah. That was their first, like, real missed opportunity that, like, I don't think they realized it was going to have the repercussions from the cast and the fan base that it did.
Yeah. Dude, I completely forgot about that. I remember how adamantly everyone was like, bring Gunn back.
Yeah.
Stop. Bring Gunn back.
Yeah. Like, giving him flack for tweets he had made like a decade ago when he was working for a studio that was the norm. Like, the Toxic Avenger is what he was working on before when he was doing these tweets, like the Traumaville movies.
But, now, this wasn't a topic I approached with a clear-cut answer to or anything.
I don't think there is an answer to it. I think it's just it's kind of thought-provoking. Like, where are we going? What have we done? Like, where's this going next? Because I do feel like movies that may have been really popular a few years ago,
they don't stay.
Yeah, well, not even that. That, like, I mean, like, I feel like there are certain movies that are being made now, or have been made now, or that may be coming out, that if it would have been made like 10, even 5 years ago, they would have been received much better. Not that they would have been better movies, but people would have been more forgiving. And the one that I'm thinking of, like, I really fear that if it had come out like 8-10 years ago, people would have been more receptive to The Crow, the reboot that's happening. Because one point that you brought up when we watched the trailer was, in the age of John Wick, you need to have better
Actually,
action.
I said John Wick and Joker. Because it has that sort of psychological aspect to it.
You need to be better than this. That, like, we wouldn't have had some of these movies that, like, have been breaking the norm of what it is now. I don't know. Maybe it still would have been sort of hated on. Like,
let's
it is
not
right
mince
now.
words. People hate that movie. It's not even out yet.
Oh, but like another movie that I think is like really really bucking this trend, and I know you haven't seen either of them yet, but like I've seen both Dune movies so far, and if you're not paying attention, you will not know what's happening.
It's my understanding the books are very, very thick too.
They are a marathon to read. I grew up with them. It was my first experience to sci-fi. Like, arguably, I feel like the Dune trilogy, the first 3 books, is to sci-fi what Lord of the Rings was to fantasy. Because, like, when you read Dune, or even if you watch the movies, the 2 that have come out, you'll start to see this is where they got this idea in this movie. This is where Lucas got the idea for this. Like, I mean, like, he talks about spice in Star Wars. Spice comes from Dune. Like, that's one of the driving forces of it. So he just used spice. But spice is never really explained in the Star Wars universe.
It's okay, Rob.
I know.
It's okay.
I know. But, like, if you're not paying attention even to these movies, my dad loves these books. But he said the first time he read the first book, he had to read it twice to figure out what was happening.
That's what I've heard a lot of. But I'm excited to see what happened. Well, excited may be slightly too positive.
Interested
to see where media goes. Because in my perspective, I see a lot of indie companies and creators that are doing exactly the things I want to see, like the A24 studios. Jordan Peele, love the stuff he's been doing, man.
Yeah.
Those are some tight scripts and movies, concepts. But none of these are like these massive big budget things, and they don't have these quadruple $1 trillion budgets that they're never going to make it back on.
And now you have, that's another issue. Like we were talking about, like where's all the money go? But I was watching another commenter or another commentary on the movie industry, and the amount of money that a movie, a blockbuster, quote unquote, the amount of revenue it has to make to not be considered a flop is ridiculous. They need to stop dumping endless buckets of money into movies, because then nothing will be a success. Like,
and sometimes limited resources creates innovation.
It makes you think about what you're doing rather than just, oh, we can fix this in post, or oh, I'll just get reshoots. Or
is this scene important? Do we really need this? Is it going to be plot relevant?
Yes.
No? Okay. Well, oh man, you made a really concise movie. Oh, I took out good things then. Like,
yeah.
Like, it's all right to be checked and balanced when you're creating something. You yourself are not a maestro. You're going to have flaws. Let someone else look at it and be like, hey, dude, why are there glowing lightsabers in space? Well, because they're cool. All right. But, like, you got to have someone balance you out.
So, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think there's an answer to this. I don't even think this was something that we brought up with the intention of answering.
No.
It was just something we wanted to talk about, something you wanted to mention. I think the things that we talked about are fairly legitimate reasons of why this was happening. Once again, if you stayed with us this long, we greatly appreciate you. But please feel free to drop a comment if you are watching on YouTube.
And if you have any...
Yeah.
If you have any ideas of why this might be happening, or you have an example of a movie where you're like, I know for a fact this just could have been written better, let us know.
That's the most heartbreaking thing. When you're watching a movie and you can realize there's a really good story that just got lost right here. That to me is like the most heartbreaking thing. That it's like, this could have been fantastic. Because I can't think of any of the movies off the top of my head right now, but how many times have I said that to you when we've been watching movies?
Dude, like, we have the potential of, like, doing a whole separate podcast of us just fixing movie plots, because I swear that's one of our pastimes when we get together, is we talk about a movie, and then we get stuck on a point that we don't like, and we're like, you know what? If we would have done this, the rest of the movie would have worked out like this, and it would have led to this cool scene here, and it's like... Dang.
Yeah.
We wrote a better movie than what came out. Now, that is pure arrogance, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
But
like,
we put thought into it.
no, because there was one movie we walked out of. I think it was me and you.
Was it Black Adam?
Okay. No, because we never saw it in the theater,
Oh
remember?
my god, yeah.
But we walked out of there, and I think one of the first things I said was, I should not walk out of a multi-billion-dollar movie and say to myself, I could have written a better script.
Yeah.
I can't remember what movie
Venom
that was.
2?
Was it? Maybe. Maybe. But it was like... I also think, just one more thing before we wrap up, I also think there is this fear, and I think this is brought on by cancel culture, there is this fear that studios have of offending anybody.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Sometimes, if you just say the wrong thing in the wrong context, there are people that just turn on you.
In a movie
Yeah.
that is a fictitious setting.
I mean, it was kind of a point that we brought up with Avatar, but like Sokka's whole losing his sexism thing is, I think, is a symptom of exactly that, cancel culture and a lack of media literacy. Because yeah, if in the first couple episodes of a show you see this character being super sexist and then you drop the show, that's all you're going to remember is this character was sexist. But if you let it play out and you see where it goes, then you realize that Sokka is supposed to go on this journey of self-discovery and learning the world and
Yeah.
challenging his own ideals and morals to a degree that when he gets to the end of that conflict, to that resolution, he's a better person, he's a bigger person because of it. And he didn't have to fight a woman, he didn't have to have a woman directly tell him to his face, hey, we're equal like you, treat us with respect. Suki did beat the crap out of him, not denying that.
Well, and that brings up a good point about the end of his journey, that by the time they meet up again in the third book, he's more deserving of the relationship that they eventually have. Like, you can believe that this is the guy she would fall for because he's made that change. And don't get me wrong, like, Sokka still has his moments.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I like about him, that it's not a wholesale change. Like, there are still little idiosyncrasies that stay with him, but his view of the world of women has changed, and she realizes that.
Like, he literally grows as a person, not as a character, but he grows as a person, so you relate to it. You don't get this feeling of, oh, when I was 10, I was super mean to girls because I thought guys were better than them. You get the feeling of, oh, I've been there. I relate to Sokka. I understand now that I'm older the exact same lesson he learned. Like, you're robbing people of what you could have put in there. And that's really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about media literacy. Like, when you watch something and you think you could write it better, you think there could have been a theme that could have stood out more, and people just either don't see it, they don't care, or production doesn't see it, doesn't care. But either way, someone's dropping the ball.
Yeah. So let us know what you think. If you're watching on YouTube and you have access to the comments, comment down below. If you're listening on Spotify, you can find me on YouTube at Brickentire. You can find me at Brickentire on Instagram as well.
I'm Uncle_Brit on most things. I do not have YouTube, but hey, I'm here.
Thank you for listening. Until next time, this has been Ralph World.
Ralph World.